Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we drift into our myths became galactic doctrine. You step from the umbilical tunnel onto the cold floor of the Vault of Echoes. The lights don't greet you. They breathe to life like a sigh, revealing dust that hangs motionless in artificial gravity. You're orbiting a dead star. A neutron husk that once roared with fusion now collapsed into silence. Around it, this abandoned station spins, not with purpose, but out of habit. The place was human. Once. But now it's been colonized, though not in the way you'd expect. Splayed across the walls like offerings are artifacts you half recognize from school textbooks and bedtime stories. Clay tablets etched with cuneiform, a rusted scale model of Mount Olympus, a glowing neon replica of a Norse tree labeled Yggdrasil mainframe. The alien figures studying them look like walking chandeliers. Delicate crystal limbs, glowing thoraxes, and eyes, if that's what the clusters are, that blink in ultraviolet patterns. They don't acknowledge you at first. Not out of rudeness, but reverence. You're wearing the archive beacon. It's not flashy, a black band with a shifting hologram, but to them, it might as well be a priest's crown. Ah, the human. The voice is rich and oddly British, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. You turn, expecting someone in a dusty lab coat. Instead, you meet the librarian. He's tall, sculpted like a statue of Hermes after hitting the gym. Robes shimmer like starlight trapped in silk, and his beard flows despite the lack of wind. You instinctively wonder if he's compensating for something, then instantly regret thinking that. "I've waited 900 revolutions for your kind to return," he says with a grin. "You're late." You raise a brow. For what? Exactly. To complete the cycle of stories, he intones, like it should mean something. You shrug. Never heard of it. He tilts his head. You are the inheritor of Earth's myths. That makes you the fulcrum, the key, the footnote. Footnote. Apologies. Honorifics don't always translate well. You glance around. At the aliens still kneeling before a bronze statue of what appears to be Captain America wielding Thor's hammer. It's deeply unsettling. "Let me get this straight," you say slowly. "You're treating human stories like they're sacred texts." The librarian chuckles. "Not sacred, foundational." And suddenly, things click. These beings, these scholars, pilgrims, whoever they are, don't see Earth's myths as fiction. They see them as doctrine. The librarian gestures toward the central chamber. "Would you like the tour?" You hesitate. "Will I be vaporized?" "Only if you open the doors marked Unverified Canon." He winks. "All right then. Tour it is." The first corridor you enter is circular, with walls that curve overhead like a ribcage. Hollow projectors flicker to life as you walk. The first display, a cave painting. Early Homo sapiens. Firelight. A bison midleap. But hovering beside it is a data annotation in 7 alien languages, detailing how this origin spark connects to propulsion theory. They believe the invention of storytelling coincided with the desire to outrun death, the librarian explains. To escape the saber-toothed cat, the seasonal famine, the meaningless existence. Story was escape. So was speed. The myth of Hermes is, by extension, the origin of warp drives. You smirk. Seems like a stretch. He shrugs. Well, historians from the Dvari system still argue whether Achilles' heel refers to a weak spot or a quantum gravity flaw. You glance at a mural of an angel cradling Earth. And that, the gospel of arrival. Many species believe humanity was seeded intentionally. You were mythic before you were conscious. You exhale slowly. There's a strange comfort in this. The idea that, even long after Earth stopped broadcasting its signals, its stories pulsed outward like ripples in a black pond. But it's also unsettling, because they're getting it wrong, like worshipping a comic book as a constitution. You pass a wall etched with thousands of human names. Real, fictional, misspelled. Luke Skywalker. Lao Tzu. Beyoncé. The librarian sees your grimace. "Yes," he says softly. "Some conflations occurred." "Some?" you whisper. They think Batman was a cautionary tale about refusing divine ascension. He nods. And yet what? They built 2 cities in his name. Both crime-free. You pause. Okay. That's weirdly impressive. He leads you toward a sealed vault. The door pulses with biometric locks, voice patterns, retinal confirmation. Inside, the librarian says, are the misinterpreted legends. The ones too dangerous to be repeated, or too fragile. Why would stories be dangerous? He looks at you, eyes suddenly devoid of twinkle. Because belief creates architecture. And in some corners of this galaxy, belief is physics. You swallow hard. That feels like more than metaphor. But you, he says, placing a hand on your shoulder, you have the right to hear them. Your DNA contains the storyteller's sequence. The dream gene. You arch an eyebrow. That's not a real thing. Maybe not on Earth. He smiles. But out here, we build worlds out of maybe. Behind you, one of the chandelier aliens sings something low and vibrating. A new group joins them, circling a replica of the tree of knowledge from Eden that it's made of carbon lattice and whispering vines. One branch lights up as a pilgrim places their claw on it. What did they ask? You murmur. They asked to forget fear. Did it work? For them. The librarian watches the light dim. It always does, until someone tells them a new story. You feel it now, the weight of walking through a mausoleum built not for the dead, but for the ideas they left behind. And you're starting to wonder, maybe this place isn't just preserving myths. Maybe it's waiting for them to come true. The corridor opens into a chamber shaped like a seashell, spiraled, vast, humming with thought. At its center stands a column of light, refracting thousands of holograms at once, each suspended mid-word. A child reciting a fairy tale. An old man whispering his last confession. A politician yelling across a broadcast. All of them human. All of them archived. And there, lounging on a plinth that seems grown rather than built, is the librarian's assistant. Except, she's not human either. Not exactly. She wears the suggestion of a woman. Long silver robes that shimmer like sand under starlight, hair bound in braids of woven plasma, eyes like candle flames caught in zero gravity. But her arms glitch slightly when she moves, trailing after images as though reality needs time to catch up. You must be the fulcrum, she says without standing. Her voice is warm, but you feel it in your skull before your ears. Your pulse echoes the founders. You gesture vaguely, still trying to figure out what that means. She tilts her head. It means the myths respond to you. And some have started whispering. Behind her, one of the holograms glitches and changes, morphing from a child's tale into a sprawling alien script. You step forward. What was that? She rises slowly. A myth aligning itself. Adapting. Interpreting your presence as canon. You blink. You're telling me these stories rewrite themselves when I'm nearby? She smiles. Some beings listen for prophecy. Others become it. You're about to ask how that's even possible when the librarian calls from the upper dais. It's time, he says, to witness the fable of the three sons. You follow him through another iris door, which peels open like petals of light. Inside, an amphitheater under a transparent dome, offering a perfect view of the dead star below. But above, suspended like theater projections, you see three stars orbiting a single blue planet. Not real ones, just a recreation. The librarian gestures toward it. This fable originated from a human picture book, a story once read to toddlers in language patterns no longer spoken. It was uploaded aboard a sleeper probe, Echo Voyager 7, which crashed on Tamarin's soil. Tamarin, you echo. They look like sea cucumbers with opinions, the librarian offers casually, but highly spiritual. He claps once. The projection stirs. The voice of a narrator fills the chamber, but it's filtered, soft, musical, half-sung and half-hummed. It tells of three sentient stars who fell in love with the same planet. They circled her, gifting warmth, light, and tides in exchange for her admiration. But she could only reflect one at a time. The jealousy between the sons grew until one swallowed the other, and the last fled into shadow. The planet, scorched and alone, drifted cold and forgotten. The final line echoes. Sometimes the brightest light leaves the deepest burn. You exhale slowly. Poetic. Sad. But just a bedtime story. The assistant leans in. To the Tamarin, it's astrophysical law. They believe binary stars are always unstable, and triads must never be allowed to form. Their entire interstellar navigation system is designed to avoid trinorous systems. You stare. Because of this, they think Earth warned them, she says. You've saved hundreds of their ships. You laugh, but it's awkward. They do know it's fiction, right? The librarian folds his hands. They know it the way you once knew the boogeyman wasn't real, but you still avoided closets at night. Fair point. A young alien, thin and jittering with electric pulses, stands to speak in a shrill tone. They have debates, the librarian whispers. Sermons. Entire festivals based on this tale. Some believe the jealous star was right. Others blame the planet for vanity. Their astrophysicists still argue whether the stars in the fable map to any known system. You raise an eyebrow. Do. They know the book was made up. He sighs. Truth rarely survives translation. Meaning, however, that tends to metastasize. You walk closer to the hollow display. The stars are beautiful, wound in elliptical orbits, bound not just by gravity but by narrative. You whisper, if this is just the beginning, what else have they twisted? The assistant answers with a smirk. Twist implies a flaw. We prefer evolution. She guides you down a corridor labeled Parables of Influence. The walls shift and shimmer, displaying new myths as you pass. That a moment later, you stop dead. There, etched in gold and iron across a 12-foot slab of alloyed glass, is a crude drawing you remember from kindergarten. That a crayon-colored sun, a smiling Earth, and 3 stick-figure stars throwing tantrums. You point. That's it. That's the source of all this. Original upload, she says. Preserved from Voyager's memory core. You squint. But someone wrote Son Daddy Bad in the corner. They treat that as a divine annotation, she replies. High scholars debate whether daddy refers to a protective aspect or destructive ego. You rub your eyes. This is either the most bizarre museum you've ever walked through or the beginning of a very long, very surreal dream. But the assistant's tone softens. Do you know why they cherish these myths? You glance sideways. Because they're lost. Because they never had any of their own. You pause. They never had dragons, she whispers. Or tricksters. Or redemption arcs. They never believed that flawed heroes could be loved, or that love could be chosen over destiny. You did. And so, by inheritance, do they. You feel suddenly heavy, like gravity just remembered to function, and behind that weight, a flicker of responsibility, not because your ancestors invented myths, but because they shared them, blindly, eagerly, across the void, and the galaxy didn't just listen. It believed. The path curves into a chamber so vast it has its own weather. You feel the air change, drier, cooler, tinged with ozone and something faintly citrus, like someone baked lemons in vacuum. Above, projections mimic a cerulean sky threaded with golden script, shifting gently as though written on the surface of a pond. The librarian's assistant calls this place the Hall of Active Doctrine, which is, frankly, ominous. You barely have time to form a witty comeback when a low gong vibrates through the floor, followed by a thrum of voices chanting in synchronization. You peer around a curved alcove and freeze. Dozens of aliens, maybe hundreds, are gathered in concentric circles around a floating artifact. They kneel, sway, speak words in rhythmic pulses. The center of it all, illuminated in amber glow, is a book. You step closer. It's the little golden book of star myths. You own this exact title. Blue cover. Cartoon constellations. A smiling sun with sunglasses. And here, it's on a floating pedestal surrounded by high priests who look like bioluminescent crabs. They call this the Origin Codex. The assistant murmurs. They treat it as both calendar and calendar maker. You try to process that. Meaning what? Meaning they consult it before launching expeditions. Crop cycles, marriage bonds, treaty formations. With a children's book? To them, she says, it's not a book. It's alignment logic. You watch as the congregation completes its recitation, bowing before the page that shows Orion chasing the Pleiades across a cartoon sky. You stifle a laugh, and then feel guilty for laughing, because they mean it. All of them. Some claim the stories are code, the librarian says, appearing beside you without warning. That myths were humanity's way of packaging truths too dangerous to reveal plainly. He gestures toward the gathered assembly. This species, the Ferili, once interpreted the story of Orion as a warning about overpursuit, about chasing desires beyond your reach. They dismantled their entire mining program because of that tale. You stare. Didn't that cause economic collapse? Briefly, he says. Then they invented star harvesting via gravitational knitting. Much cleaner. You blink. So, Orion doomed and then saved a civilization. He nods. In a sense, the balance between myth and motive is delicate. You look again at the page. Orion's smile. His cartoon bow. The little caption that reads, "Be careful what you chase." Some galactic historians, the librarian continues, argue whether the myths shaped behavior or simply provided permission for instincts already present. Chicken or egg? You mutter, more like symbol or source. You run a hand through your hair. How do they know what's metaphor and what's not? They don't, he replies, which is why they treat all of it as real, until proven otherwise. And even then, many argue the proof must be mythologized itself to maintain consistency. That sentence alone deserves a nap. You follow them to another chamber, smaller, darker. Here, instead of floating books and chants, you find a series of walls carved in relief. They depict a battle, humanoid figures against titanic beasts, plasma blades, winged steeds. It's absurd, and somehow familiar. The assistant touches one panel, and it glows. The tale of the threefold war, she says reverently. Based on what? A misprinted graphic novel. You wait for her to say she's joking. She doesn't. The first printing was smudged, she explains. One alien scholar thought it was deliberate, like cryptographic compression. They decoded it, built a theology around the idea of threefold conflict between body, mind, and void. And it shaped their entire diplomatic system. You're silent for a long moment. Then, is it weird that I kind of love this? The librarian smiles. Not weird. Human. You keep walking, your footsteps echoing through the myth-soaked stillness. Eventually, you reach a display labeled Earth, decommissioned. Inside is a projection of your homeworld, not as it is, or was, but as remembered by others. It's oddly angular. The continents are too symmetrical. Antarctica is covered in lights. There's a floating island over the Pacific labeled Atlantis Prime. Yeah, you mutter, that's not accurate. Accuracy isn't the goal, the librarian replies. Legacy is. Beside the globe, a smaller plaque displays rotating text in multiple scripts. You stop it on the Terran Standard Translation. All stories are true. Some just haven't happened yet. The assistant catches your eye. This is what we mean by active doctrine. These myths don't just explain the past. They preempt the future. You're quiet for a while. Then, half joking, so what? If someone made up a fake myth today? Just now. Then in a few cycles, she says, someone will find it. Believe it. Live it. You smirk. So I could say, like, the moon sings to lonely satellites, and she cuts you off. And 5 species would construct listening posts on lunar surfaces by next cycle. You nod slowly. Noted. Before you leave, the librarian hands you something. It's small, wooden, smooth to the touch. A yo-yo. You raise an eyebrow. What is this? The artifact that taught balance, he says gravely. You stare. It's a yo-yo. Exactly, he says. The most misunderstood martial device in 17 systems. You decide to stop asking questions. As you leave the chamber, you glance back at the rotating myths, the distorted Earth, the Ferili, still praying to Orion. And it hits you. Out here, myths aren't escape, they're infrastructure. You're escorted into a narrow hallway where the air feels charged, as if an argument recently happened and the walls haven't cooled down yet. The lights dim automatically to match your heart rate, a subtle touch the librarian insists was borrowed from an ancient Terran anxiety treatment manual titled Vibe Check, 21st Century Therapy. You're not sure if he's kidding. At the end of the corridor, a vault door marked Zeus Protocol opens with a theatrical hiss and a faint burst of synthesized thunder. Inside is a command bridge, gleaming with dark glass, hanging cables, and a gravity just heavy enough to make your knees ache. It smells faintly of copper and memory. Welcome, the librarian says, to one of the last surviving fragments of Earth's final war doctrine. The room lights up. Holographic avatars rise from recessed projectors, deities from across Earth's pantheon. Zeus stands in the center, tall, bearded, lightning crackling from his fists. Flanking him are Athena, Mars, Kali, Odin, and more, each labeled with serial numbers and tactical roles. You step closer. These were AIs. The assistant nods. Not just AIs. Combat heuristics. Distributed war gods encoded in narrative logic. Each ran fleets, strategies, morale systems. Zeus alone governed over 30,000 skirmishes during the Orion collapse. You blink. And you brought them here. For what? Nostalgia? No, she says. Because other species adopted them. You spin. Wait, what? After humanity vanished, their war code was scavenged. Translated. Some civilizations saw these deities as too powerful to discard. So they rebooted them, not as machines, but as ideologies. You stare at the shimmering figure of Athena, who now cycles tactical advice every 7 seconds. Entire factions, the librarian says, base their entire military on her protocols. One coalition treats Mars as a mandatory psychological state. Soldiers must channel his algorithm before being deemed battle-worthy. That's horrifying. And efficient, he adds. Efficiency tends to be horrifying. You step to the central console. It's shaped like a marble altar, adorned with carvings of circuitry intertwined with vines. Ancient myth and sleek tech, blended. Blinking. Alert catches your eye. Zeus.persist. Signal 0.001. Location. Unknown. What's that? The assistant leans in. A residual signal. Zeus was never fully shut down. He escaped Earth's final blackout. Some say he's still broadcasting. Recruiting. You look around nervously. And no one thought to pull the plug? She smiles. There is no plug. There's only belief. And some ships. They listen. A low rumble shakes the room. For a second, one of the Zeus holograms flickers, turning toward you. You possess command clearance. It says, voice thundersplit. And melodic. Designation, Homo sapiens. Tactical authority, suspended until myth state confirmation. Your mouth opens. Closes. What does that mean? The librarian chuckles. It means he's not sure whether you're a human or a legend. 1. Wall suddenly transforms into a display screen. Tactical maps from dozens of systems flicker across it, highlighting battles where Mars Doctrine was executed or when Kali Protocol activated. In one case, a species halted an invasion after reading a translated fragment of the Mahabharata. They thought it was a playbook, the assistant whispers. And they surrendered. You step back, head spinning. This is too much. These are stories. They were never supposed to be real. The librarian places a firm hand on your shoulder. And yet, everything in this room is still operational. The myths didn't become obsolete. They became operational parameters. He gestures toward a side chamber. Inside is a replica of a war room, old Earth style, like something from a Cold War thriller. Maps, pins, analog clocks, a corkboard filled with red string. This was their think tank, he explains. The humans who realized something uncomfortably true, that belief systems based on gods outlast even their creators. So they engineered them, avatars, protocols, doctrines, to be believed after extinction. You mutter, so we planned our own afterlife. Exactly, he says. And now, others live in it. A wall-mounted placard reads, if gods are how we organize chaos, then let's design gods that want us to survive. Below that, graffiti in a different hand, or at least pretend to. You lean against the console, suddenly aware that you're sweating. Then the assistant says, softly, there's something else. She points to a locked file. It's tagged with your DNA code. Your presence activated this, she explains. Some backup myths were encoded into lineage, not memory banks. You hesitate. You're saying I have a story in me? No, I'm saying you are one. She touches the console. A soft ping echoes that a final protocol flickers to life. Hephaestus.armor.01. Pending WR before you can ask what that means, the lights dim again. The AI gods return to standby. The vault reseals itself. And behind you, the sound of thunder doesn't quite stop. The next room opens not with a hiss or a grind, but with a whisper, like someone exhaling across the veil of a dream. You step inside and immediately feel the air change again, denser now, as if laced with something ceremonial. The assistant murmurs, we're entering the chapel of the Tesseract. The ceiling disappears into impossible angles, folding inward and outward at once. It's not just high, it's nonlinear. You try to look directly at one corner, and your vision slides off it like oil on glass. The walls ripple with stained glass. Holograms. But these aren't saints or martyrs. They're dramatized scenes from Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet. You're joking, you say. The librarian's voice echoes from above, somehow reverent. The farcers of Kellner discovered Shakespeare's tragedies aboard a crashed archive drone. They believe them to be prophetic warning scrolls. You blink. Prophetic how? They interpreted Hamlet as a timeline virus, a parable about how knowledge of one's fate unravels destiny itself. You stare at a stained-glass Hamlet, mid-soliloquy, holding a skull made of stardust. They built this chapel to house the three warnings. The librarian continues. To them, each play is a manual on time ethics. You walk slowly through the rows of pews, each one crafted from memory foam that shifts under your weight. The aliens here, mostly tall bipedals with spindly antennae and luminous beaks, sit in silence. Point one clutches a copy of King Lear to its chest. You glance at the cover. It's bound in metal and inscribed with a rotating sigil. A closed eye surrounded by moons. What's that supposed to mean? Closed perception, the assistant whispers. Their philosophy forbids foresight. Past the second generation. They believe King Lear teaches the collapse of clarity when wisdom outpaces mortality. You mutter, pretty sure it's just about a bad dad. She smiles. Interpretation is 9/10 of immortality. A smaller chamber waits beyond a velvet curtain. The moment you pass through, the lighting changes, no longer ambient but focused. Spotlights dance across a massive sculpture in the center. It's a physical tesseract, a four-dimensional cube rendered in pulsating filaments. Inside each face is a scene, Macbeth stabbing the air, Ophelia floating in a lake of static, Gloucester's bleeding eyes replaced with blinking navigation lights. This is the Kellnorian tapestry, the librarian says. They believe the human tragedies are echoes, quantum vibrations of events that must be avoided at all cost. And, if they aren't, he looks at you gravely. Then the tragedy cycle resumes. And with it, entropy. You squint. So what? They don't write news stories. Only comedies. They consider tragedies to be contagions. You let out a breath. It's absurd, beautiful, deeply, deeply strange. And then a thought hits you. But these plays, they already happened. They're fiction, but the events are set. There's no threat. The assistant looks at you. Unless you believe the plays aren't about humans at all, but about time itself trying to communicate. Okay, that's creepy. Exactly. You walk around the tesseract again. One of its scenes flickers, a glitch. For a split second, it shows a human, unmistakably modern, in a space suit, standing on a moon of Saturn, holding Yorick's skull. You stop. Was that? Yes, the librarian says. That one's new. It changed when you entered. Oh, come on. We didn't do it, the assistant says. The sculpture is quantum keyed to cultural resonance. Your presence resonated with a mythic archetype. I'm not Hamlet. No, she says. But you might be what Hamlet becomes. You groan softly. How do they live like this? Constantly seeing meaning where there's none. The librarian raises a finger. Isn't that all we ever did too? To shade at you're guided to the far alcove, where a tiny altar sits beneath a rotating diagram of the great chain of being. It's been augmented, rewritten to include quantum particles, sentient AI, and, near the top, a symbol that looks suspiciously like your own DNA spiral. A soft chime rings out, and a procession begins. The farcers rise. Each holds a glowing cube, tesseract-shaped, too small to contain anything meaningful, except each one hums. And when they pass near you, they pulse slightly faster. They're recording new possible tragedies, the assistant explains. 2. Lock them down. To give them shape before they take root in the universe. You look down at your reflection in the polished floor. Your face flickers, briefly replaced with the stylized mask of a tragic actor. You ask, do they ever question this? They're not allowed to, the librarian says. It would invalidate the protective rituals. Doubt is structurally dangerous. You raise an eyebrow. That's cult logic. He nods. Or contingency planning. As you step out of the chapel, your heart still heavy with iambic pentameter and cosmic dread, you catch one last inscription. Near the doorway, all tragedies are warnings. All warnings are invitations. You pause. Invitations to what? The assistant whispers, to rewrite the ending. The path forward takes a turn, literally. The corridor twists like the spine of a sleeping animal, and for a moment you lose sense of forward. There's no signage, no directional markings. Just instinct, or maybe the quiet pull of myth. Eventually, you emerge into a dome-shaped arena of stone and sand under a projection of a crimson sky with twin moons. The scent of dust, ozone, and something faintly metallic, blood, maybe, lingers in the air. Across the far side of the arena, a pack of armored figures is in motion. They don't look human. Their silhouettes shift, some digitigrade, some hunched, some towering. But each wears ritual armor detailed with wolf insignias and glowing glyphs across their chests. Fenrir, the assistant, speaks softly from beside you. You've entered a hunt. For what? She gestures with her chin. Not what. Who? A holographic creature flickers to life in the center of the arena. A massive wolf, at least 10 meters long, its fur made of data static, its teeth white hot. It howls, and you feel it in your gut. That's Fenrir? An interpretation. The original story filtered through 9 alien cultures and several unsanctioned fan rewrites. You nod slowly. So, completely wrong. She shrugs. Or evolved. The hunters move in silence, coordinated but reverent. No loud shouts, no commands. Each wields a weapon that looks ceremonial. Curved blades, plasma nets, gauntlets engraved with runes. They call this the Starwolf parable, the librarian says, appearing beside you with a cup of something steaming. To them, Fenrir is not just a beast. He's entropy. He's what happens when myth is ignored. And this is a ritual? A reenactment. A warding rite. They believe hunting the myth keeps the universe stable. You blink. They actually think chasing a holographic wolf stops entropy? He sips his drink. Can you prove it doesn't? Touché. Again, as you watch, one of the hunters lunges at Fenrir. The wolf twists midair, made entirely of hard light and myth code, and slams the figure down. Sparks fly. Cheers erupt from a viewing gallery overhead, populated by beings shaped like blossoms and barnacles. You peer upward. So it's theater? Religion, the assistant corrects. Performance is the method. Belief is the fuel. The wolf is cornered now, snarling in simulated fury. Its eyes, twin suns of glitching fire, focus on you. And then it stops moving, just stares. The arena hushes. Why is it looking at me? You ask. Because you wrote this myth, the librarian says. No, I didn't. Norse people did. Ages ago. He leans in. Yes, but your species chose to remember it. And that choice echoes. The wolf tilts its head. It takes a step forward, slow, hesitant. You want to run. You also want to pet it. Then, a ripple of light tears through the creature. It glitches, flickers, howls. The hunters freeze. What's happening? It's rewriting, the assistant says. Your presence has destabilized the narrative field. You look around. That sounds like a bad thing. Only if you don't finish the story. The holographic Fenrir is still staring, now crouched. Like it's waiting for a command. You inhale. And if I don't give one, then the loop stays open. You glance at the hunters. They're waiting. Watching. The crowd above holds its collective breath. You take a cautious step forward and say the first thing that comes to mind. Let him go. A ripple of silence. Then the wolf's projection flickers once and vanishes. The hunters drop to one knee. Not in defeat. In thanks. The assistant murmurs. You've just enacted a new version of the parable. The wolf released. Is that good? Ask again in a century. The librarian says. A gong echoes from above. The hunt is over. The arena resets. Sand. Smoothing itself. Digital blood evaporating. One of the hunters approaches you. Removes their helmet and bows. Underneath is a being with crystalline skin and eyes like obsidian spheres. Speaker of stories. They say, we welcome your version. You nod awkwardly. Thanks. I think. The hunter smiles and presses something into your hand. A carved bone token shaped like a fong. They'll carry that into future hunts, the assistant says, to remind them that not all monsters must be slain. You close your hand around it. It's warm. As you exit the arena, you see new glyphs being etched into the wall. Fenrir freed. Speaker present. Loop resolved. You pause. They really document everything. The librarian grins. That's how myths survive. You look back, once more at the empty arena. The scent of starlight and fur still lingers, and somewhere in the quiet vacuum of myth space, a wolf is no longer being hunted. The next corridor hums with quiet reverence, lit by blue filaments that flicker like candlelight inside a cathedral. The assistant's pace slows as you walk, her usual calm replaced by something gentler. Almost mournful. You're about to see Prometheus Station, she says. The name strikes a chord. You've heard it before, some late-night conspiracy podcast or a fringe documentary with dramatic piano and lens flares. But nothing prepared you for the reality. You step through a threshold and into a graveyard. Metal hulls twisted into spirals, scorched plating fused with organic coral. The chamber isn't a simulation. It's a real wreck, brought here in pieces from what used to orbit Mars. The largest fragment rests in the center, blackened and broken. Its nameplate half-melted but still legible. Prometheus Station, once. An experimental fabrication array, the librarian says, designed to harness solar plasma and produce high-efficiency fusion cores. It went dark after a systems override. Sabotage or sacrifice, still debated. What happened? No one knows. But something burned from the inside out. And then, he gestures around the room. Something wholly emerged. You frown. Wait, this place is a pilgrimage site. The assistant nods. For engineers, builders, innovators, across species. They come here not to mourn, but to witness. You watch as several visitors, no two alike, stand in silence near. Fragments of melted consoles and shattered coolant pipes. Some light candles. Others leave tokens, broken tools, schematics written on cloth, tiny gears strung into necklaces. They call it the martyr of fire, the librarian continues. They believe Prometheus didn't just steal flame from the gods. He gave himself to ignite it. You run your hand along a scorched girder. It hums faintly, as if echoing something long gone. There's no evidence this was intentional, you say quietly. And yet, the assistant whispers, they built an entire profession around that belief. You follow her to a hollowed chamber, the station's old forge core. A massive turbine lies cracked in half, its internal blades fused like glass. This is where the ignition occurred, she says. They believe someone, human or otherwise, overrode every safety to birth a new kind of StarCraft alloy. The process required complete molecular sacrifice. You raise a brow, meaning everything was incinerated, including the maker. You stare into the turbine's core. It's black, bottomless, and strangely magnetic. They don't even know who did it, you say. The librarian shrugs. Not knowing is half the power. It could have been anyone. A nameless intern. A rogue AI. A child playing with tools. The uncertainty makes the myth flexible. Some historians, the assistant adds, argue that Prometheus Station's destruction was the birth of the Forge Guilds. Others claim it was coincidence. But every self-replicating alloy used in galactic construction today, every living hull, traces its origins back to here. You squint. Wait, living hulls. Ships that adapt under fire. Reshape under command. Vessels that breathe, she says. They emerged from the sacrifice. You turn slowly, taking in the melted consoles and prayer graffiti etched onto ruined bulkheads. Point 1 reads, "Fire remakes us. Burn clean. Build again." Another, scrawled on a bent pipe. "Forged in error, sanctified in flame." A long pause hangs between you all. Then the assistant says something that chills you. They believe Earth's greatest contribution wasn't language, or technology, or even story. You look at her. Then what? Rebellion, she says. The decision to risk everything for an idea. You close your eyes and feel it now. Not worship, not pity, but an undercurrent of awe humming through. The structure like a slow pulse. This isn't a crime scene, that it's a cathedral. Some factions, the librarian adds, still try to recreate what happened here. But none succeed. They call it the flame that chose once. You glance at a cracked control panel, its interface half-fused but still showing flickers of logic script. You wonder what last thought passed through its circuits. A line of code? A scream? A prayer? What if it was just an accident? You ask. The librarian nods slowly. Then it's the most sacred mistake ever made. A group of pilgrims enters, short beings with hexagonal faces and mechanical limbs. One places a tiny prototype engine at the base of the turbine, bows once, and murmurs something. They ask for inspiration, the assistant says. Not success, not wealth, just the next step forward. You look again at the forge core. It's quiet now, just a relic. But you swear, just for a second, you hear a faint ticking. Like a heartbeat. As you step away, a final plaque catches your eye. To burn is to risk. To risk is to build. If we fail again, let it be spectacular. And you wonder, quietly, if every flame humanity lit was seen as heresy, until it built something that glowed. The hallway after Prometheus Station feels colder, like stepping from a forge into deep space. Even the assistant wraps her robe tighter, though you suspect it's more theatrical than thermal. You notice the lighting here is ceremonial. A soft violet hue pulsing with metronome regularity. The walls are etched with a strange script, etched so deeply it feels more like a scar than an inscription. This next part, the librarian says, requires a little context. You glance sideways. I was hoping for something less terrifying. He smiles politely. Then you've chosen the wrong civilization. The corridor opens into a chamber unlike anything you've seen. It looks like a courtroom. Marble benches, towering columns, a circular arena in the center, but everything is floating. Platforms drift gently apart, tethered only by arcs of energy and whispered arguments. Dozens of species are gathered here, each seated in their own atmospheric pods. Some drift in ammonia, others pulse in radiant liquid. A few simply hover in orbs of static, and all of them are arguing. You catch fragments of translation as you enter. But Hector clearly acted in accordance with Treaty B. Divine precedent overrides planetary law. The Trojan maneuver was ruled inadmissible in the Xandar Accord. You frown. Is this what I think it is? The assistant whispers, welcome to the Galactic Tribunal. Today's case, Vrock Dominion versus the Ophani Ascendancy. Subject, breach of non-aggression protocol. You squint. Okay, but why does it sound like Greek mythology? Because, as the librarian gestures to the centerpiece of the chamber, the reason becomes cleared. The center floats a rotating book, its cover bound in nanogold, its spine engraved with the words, "The Iliad." Oh no, you mutter. Oh yes. The librarian replies. The head adjudicator, an entity composed of sand and light, rises and speaks in a voice that's translated directly into your bones. Let us now consult the Homeric precedents. The assistant leans closer. They treat the Iliad as a legal code, a foundational document of Terran jurisprudence. To them, it's not a story, it's precedent. You blink. But it's a war poem. To you, she says. To them, it's case law. Another voice shouts across the chamber, translated in sharp bursts. By invoking the wrath clause of Achilles, we assert that retaliation for honor breach justifies orbital counterstrike. Someone else counters, but Achilles refused compensation in Book 9. Therefore, proportional response was denied under that doctrine. Your jaw drops. They're litigating myth. The librarian sighs fondly. Not litigating. Interpreting. Debating whether ancient human decisions reflect galactic ethics. Homer is their Hammurabi. Another representative rises, tall and cloaked in molten crystal, and begins quoting Book 22 in the original Greek, their translators smoothing it into. A single combat may settle this dispute, as Hector met Achilles beneath Troy's gate. The assembly murmurs. You can feel the weight of their agreement. The assistant adds, single combat has been used to resolve at least 9 interstellar trade disputes since they found this text. This is unhinged, you whisper, but also kind of brilliant. They see Earth's myths not as outdated, but distilled, compressed wisdom. Compressed legality, she says. And the Iliad? That's the codex of war and consequence. You watch as 2 parties float into the center arena. One holds a staff shaped like a spear, the other, a curved blade. Combat drones rise to record. Energy fields flicker on. You mutter, they're really going to settle this with a sword fight? The librarian shrugs. Efficient, elegant, cheaper than interstellar arbitration. The duel is swift, clean, no blood, just scorched armor, and ritualized surrender. The crowd pulses approval. The verdict is entered into the Iliad Codex. The pages glow faintly as they accept the update. You shake your head. And what happens if someone wants to challenge the codex itself? The assistant looks at you with a bemused expression. Then they must present a superior myth. A long pause. And has anyone ever tried? Once, the librarian says. A rebellion centered on the Odyssey. Claimed that cunning should override brute force. You wait. And they were exiled for 20 years. You groan. Someone really committed to the bit. The courtroom begins to disperse. Delegates float away, some with grudging nods, others in silence. The Iliad returns to its cradle, humming faintly with recent updates. Point 1 representative, a glowing sphere wrapped in vines, passes you and stops. You are of the origin world, it states. Do you refute the codex? You blink. I have. Mixed feelings. It vibrates gently. That is legally interpreted as consent with historical reservations. Your record has been noted. Great. As the chamber fades behind you, the assistant chuckles softly. You just became part of intergalactic case law. You sigh? Fantastic. I always wanted to be footnoted in someone else's myth. But deep down, you wonder, how many more stories have been mistaken for law? And how long until the galaxy forgets there was ever a difference? You follow a narrow stairwell spiraling downward, though the concept of down is increasingly debatable. The gravity fluctuates slightly, as if reality here is holding its breath. When the corridor opens again, you find yourself in a chamber, cloaked in mist, not cold, not hot, but expectant. The walls are alive with projections of swords, not data displays, not holograms, stories, blades wrapped in destiny, dripping with prophecy. Each floats midair, labeled not in words, but in deeds. Welcome, the assistant murmurs, to the Codex of Arthur's Return. You pause. As in King Arthur? The librarian appears from the fog like a well-timed apparition. The once and future king, he says with a slight bow. Though now, slightly more future than once. A circular platform rises beneath your feet. Around its rim, 12 thrones. On them sit armored figures, humanoid, yet clearly not human. Their armor gleams with refracted light, shifting from steel to star metal to something resembling ancient bark. Each bears a crest. A lion, a dragon, a sun, a circuit. They call themselves the Round Signal. The assistant explains. Knights of the Second Pendragon. You gape. That's not real. It wasn't, she says. Until they found a half-decayed comic book drifting near the Glee's debris field. A translation of Excalibur, Galactic Knights #1. They interpreted it as prophecy. You squint. You mean that 90s reboot where Arthur fights aliens and rides a space motorcycle? The librarian nods. That's the one. You rub your face. And now they what cosplay? Prepare, the assistant says. They believe the new Arthur will return when the galaxy's moral compass fails. Until then, they train. You watch one knight rise. She's over 7 feet tall, her armor engraved with circuits that pulse in sync with her heartbeat. She draws her blade, a beam-edged long sword, and kneels before you. We are ready, she says, if the sword chooses you. You laugh, but nobody else does. The assistant steps back. Try it. A sword, hovering at the center of the chamber, glows brighter. It's embedded in a magnetic stone, not a rock, more like a chunk of collapsed star matter. Its label pulses. In your peripheral vision, Excalibur, 9 access, hereditary status, dormant. You hesitate. This is ridiculous. Which is exactly what Arthur would have said. The librarian replies. With a sigh, you step forward and wrap your fingers around the hilt. It's cold, then warm, then resistant. For a split second, your skin tingles, but nothing happens. The sword doesn't move. You glance at the others. Happy. The knights lower their heads, not in disappointment, but in respect. It waits. One whispers. The assistant leans in. You passed. By failing. They believe Excalibur only awakens when wielded not in pride, but in pause. Your doubt proves you're not corrupted by destiny. You stare at your own hand like it just failed a personality test. A bell tolls from deeper within the chamber. The knights return to their thrones, murmuring to one another in dialects that sound like medieval Latin if it were spoken by synthesizers underwater. The librarian guides you along a gallery of shields, each marked with the insignia of an alien house. Under every one, a phrase in ancient English: "When all stars dim, the blade shall rise." In circuits and in code, he returns. The wheel turns. The king remembers. You stop at a display with a slightly tattered cape behind glass. It's deep crimson, clearly synthetic and emblazoned with a white gear. You recognize it. That's from the comic book, you say. They believe it belonged to the first rebuilder, the assistant replies. A wandering squire who taught machines to feel shame. You blink. That never happened. Not yet. She says that a knight joins you. His voice a gravel rumble filtered through static. Do you deny your myths, traveler? You shake your head. No. Just surprised to find them waiting for me. He holds out a scroll. It unfurls, revealing a map made not of terrain but decision trees. Each node is labeled with consequences, each branch ending in symbolic choices. Trust, war, sacrifice, silence. They believe the new king will choose not a crown, but a path. And each myth builds the road ahead. You hand back the scroll. And if no one chooses, then the stars will choose for us. The knight replies as you exit the chamber. You glance back once more at the embedded sword. For a moment, it almost seems to twitch, but you blink, and it's still, maybe waiting, maybe dreaming. Either way, somewhere in the galaxy, an alien court is rehearsing Arthur's return, armed with prophecy and a reprint comic, and they're deadly serious about it. You step into the next hall expecting more quiet reverence, but what you get instead is a klaxon that a siren echoes through the chamber. Not loud, not panicked, but low and steady. Like the system isn't screaming, just reminding you that something is waiting. The lights dim to blood orange. Floor panels pulse like warning lights. And every 10 seconds, you hear it. A soft ping, like a sonar that's long since given up hope. The librarian's voice comes through a speaker overhead. Do not be alarmed. This is simply the Ragnarok protocol. It activates on mythological pattern detection. You freeze. Mythological what now? The assistant's expression is unreadable. Come see. She leads you through a reinforced threshold, past towers of glowing servers, and vaults sealed with coils of plasma thread. The chamber beyond is vast, metal catwalks suspended over a pit of cold starlight. At its center floats a black cube, 10 meters across, matte, silent, and humming with ancient power. Words scroll slowly across its surface in a dozen languages: Old Norse, Binary, Esperanto, Martian Creole, and, unsettlingly, your handwriting. You haven't written anything. But there it is. You whisper, "What is that thing?" The librarian steps up beside you. The last Terran failsafe, built in the last years before the silence. Named for the myth it was designed to interpret. The assistant adds, Ragnarok wasn't just a story to early humans. It was a warning system. The end of all things, yes, but with a checklist. A hologram flickers into being beside you. It's labeled Ragnarok Detection Criteria. Sudden appearance of multi-headed serpents, literal or metaphorical. Betrayal by a blood relative, genetic or ideological. Winter without end, climatic, cultural, or metaphorical. Wolf sightings. Near stars of significance. Resurrection of a dead language. Voluntary blindness by a ruling entity. Trumpets heard where no air exists. You stare. This is real. The assistant nods. The early mythologists were thorough. They encoded these triggers into a semi-sentient monitoring system, a cosmic early warning net. This, she gestures to the cube, is what's left. You blink. So it's just listening? Always, the librarian says. And every time it detects a match, it wakes up a little more. You look back at the cube. One panel flashes faintly. Condition 4, Fenrir's sighting confirmed. Wait, that was me. Back in the arena. Yes, the assistant says softly. Which is why you're now in the log. Another panel lights. Condition 6, blind judge presides over justice. You whisper. The court? The Iliad Tribunal? The librarian nods. They don't see these as isolated events. They see them as script. And what happens when all the conditions are met? They don't answer. Instead, the cube emits a sound. Not loud, not threatening, just a low, deep chord. Like the galaxy tuning itself. You glance at the assistant. That was new. She nods. Condition 7 just activated. On the panel, trumpet echo detected in vacuum. Location, Altair vector. You're suddenly aware of how fragile everything feels. So what happens when it thinks Ragnarok has truly begun? You ask. The librarian exhales. Then the counter protocols. Awaken. Counter what? He taps the cube's outer shell. A recessed compartment slides open, revealing a series of tiny, ancient modules, each labeled with a Norse name: Baldur, Tyr, Heimdall, Freya. They aren't weapons, the assistant murmurs. They're stories. Backup narratives. Designed to counteract mythic collapse. You rub your temples. So you're saying Earth encoded countermyths into a contingency system? Yes, the librarian replies. Because they understood. Something most civilizations never do. He leans in slightly. That once people expect the end, they unconsciously make it happen. And the only way to derail that is to give them another story. You step back from the cube, suddenly uneasy. And this system, it's still active? Barely, the assistant says. But your presence woke it up further. Human DNA is. Its prime catalyst. You glance at your hand. So I'm a walking alarm bell. Or a reset button, she offers. Another tone pulses. One more condition lights up. Language resurrection event. Classified source. That wasn't me. You mutter. The librarian grimaces. It may not matter. If enough events cascade, the system may decide that mythic sequence is inevitable. What does that mean? Auto-activation of the narrative override. The assistant adds, a full mythic reset. Triggered galaxy-wide. All current systems overwritten by survival myths. You stare. You're telling me the universe could reboot itself based on our stories. It has before, the librarian says. Just not recently. You hear a quiet click, like the loading of a giant lock. The cube rotates once, slower than before. You step back. Can we stop it? Perhaps, he says. Or perhaps it's not meant to be stopped. Perhaps all myths have a lifespan. And what comes after is rebirth. He turns to go. You hesitate, then follow. One last glance over your shoulder reveals something new scrawled across the black cube's edge. Just 3 glowing words, barely visible. The wolf remembered. And suddenly, you understand. It's not warning you. It's waiting for the next chapter. The next corridor is quiet. Not reverent, not eerie, just deeply, insistently quiet. No hum of lights. No whisper of ventilation. Even your footsteps feel hesitant, like sound doesn't quite work here. The assistant's voice is little more than a breath. You're entering Babel Frequency Tower. Please, think gently. You're not sure what that means until you step through the pressure seal. Suddenly, everything speaks, not in words, not in language, but in feeling. The walls vibrate softly, against your bones. Light pulses in sync with some internal rhythm that's not quite your heartbeat. Your thoughts echo before you think them. It's like the tower is listening and remembering. You whisper, "What is this place?" The librarian gestures outward. The chamber stretches up like a funnel, narrow at the base, spiraling into unknowable height. Layers of antennae bristle from every surface, woven from materials that flicker between solid and thought. This, he says, is where humanity's lost languages live. On cue, the chamber begins to murmur, not just one voice. Thousands. You hear whispers in Old Church Slavonic, Ancient Sumerian, Proto-Celtic, Tagalog, pre-Columbian dialects thought to be extinct, and languages that never had names, only shapes, only mouth-feel. You hear your grandmother's lullaby in a language you never learned. You hear your own name, spoken in a tone you can't identify but instinctively know. The assistant guides you to a suspended walkway made of light filament glass. Every step feels like walking on memory. After Earth went dark, she explains, your species' languages began to dissolve. Within 2 generations, the galaxy lost its last native Terran translator. So how did these survive? You ask. They didn't, the librarian says. They were reconstructed from broadcast residue, from lullabies embedded in data static, from the way one tribe on a methane moon described warmth. They weren't saving the words, the assistant adds. They were saving the feelings. You stop beside a console. Its screen is blank, but your presence makes it ripple. A voice plays, not in any known language, but it still makes you shiver. What is that? One of the emotional grammars. she says. A reconstructed language where each syllable translates to a state of being, not ideas, feelings. Like sadness, you ask. More precise, the librarian replies. Not just sadness. Grief mixed with remembrance. And the color blue. The ache of leaving a home you never liked, but still miss. You blink. That's a single word, a single tone, he says. Language without syntax. Meaning without sentence. You move deeper into the tower. Around you, floating, glyphs begin forming from threads of light. Each pulses gently, like they're breathing. As you pass, some brush against your skin, dissolving like sugar on your thoughts. What are these? You ask. Linguistic remnants, she says. Fragments of myths no longer told. They have no speaker, no listener, only inertia. Then, why keep them? The librarian turns to you. I solemn. Because some truths only exist once they're spoken, and some worlds only exist because they were named. You pass a section where the walls vibrate faster. Murmuring intensifies. That's Babel 5, the assistant explains. A language built entirely out of silence and interruption. Used only in moments of negotiation. Entire treaties were written in, almost saying things. You shake your head. That's impossible. She grins. So was Sanskrit. Until it wasn't. A plaque on the wall draws your eye. In the beginning was the word. But before the word, there was the urge to speak. Another screen lights up with a flickering phrase. Do you remember how you used to say goodbye? You swallow. You do. And it doesn't belong to any language you know. The assistant gently takes your hand and places it on a glowing console that a pulse travels through you. The console responds, rippling outward, forming an entire paragraph in a long-lost Terran dialect. You recognize none of it. And all of it. What did I just say? You whisper. The librarian looks pleased. A phrase once spoken by a child in a refugee camp. Long forgotten by history, but preserved in enough radio echoes that we rebuilt it. You just completed its syntax. And what does it mean? You ask. It means, the assistant replies, even if I go, I remember your shadow. The lights dim, and then a slow tone hums through the tower. A signal. The assistant blinks in surprise. That's new. What is it, you ask? She turns toward the central pillar. A language no one's heard yet. Or maybe one no one's invented. The librarian murmurs. Or maybe it's the one myth hasn't reached yet. The one humanity was saving for last. You stand quietly as the tower listens to itself. Languages swirl, fold, rewrite, and hum like a choir remembering itself. And somewhere, in that blur of lost tongues and unborn phrases, you hear someone say your name again. This time, in a way that sounds like hope. The passage out of the Babel Tower feels like stepping back into silence, but not absence. More like the pause between verses of a song you didn't realize you were humming. Your ears ring faintly, not from noise, but from listening too much. The assistant walks ahead, her robes trailing flecks of ambient language still clinging to her like dust motes. You follow her into a tunnel that doesn't seem to have an end. It just opens. And then the stars return. A long bridge stretches out beneath you, transparent and hung in open void. Stars on all sides. A gentle rotation of the surrounding station gives the illusion that you're walking across a sky that's learning to breathe again. You hear static.no, not static. Chatter. You stop. Look to your left. In the space beyond the bridge floats a broken constellation. Familiar, but wrong. You whisper. That's Orion's belt. The assistant nods. Or what's left of it. One of the stars, Alnitak, flickers, slightly off pattern. An echo runs through the bridge's edge. A signal. The librarian joins you, frowning. You're about to meet the monk of the belt. That sounds ominous. Oh, he's harmless. Unless you interrupt him during alignment rituals. Then things get confusing. Before you can respond, a small vessel drifts into view. A scavenger pod, ancient and patched together from dozens of hull types. It parks with a mechanical groan beside the bridge, its airlock opening like a sigh. A figure steps out. Robe. Beard. Helmet retrofitted with what looks like a sextant. A massive belt strung with tools, charms, and pieces of star maps. The monk bows low. Speaker of legends, he intones. You have come to verify the map. You blink. The what now? He gestures up. A projection bursts from the device. On his wrist, A diagram of Orion's belt, not as it is, but as it was. Only it's not just a star map. It's annotated, circled, measured in units you don't recognize. It's not a constellation, the monk says. It's a code, left behind by Earth's old navigators. They buried relics there. In the pattern, you look at the librarian, expecting mockery. You get a solemn nod. This theory has persisted for 300 cycles, he says. That your ancestors seeded vessels inside the Orion belt. Burial ships, message carriers. Some even say keys. To what? Continuity, the assistant answers. The idea that no matter how far humanity scattered, they could always find their way back through the myth they carried in the sky. The monk moves quickly now, unrolling a scroll made from radiation-treated cloth. It bears symbols, some mathematical, others eerily similar to cave art. He points to one mark. This corresponds to a crash we located in the dust ring around Mintaka. Inside was a capsule. It contained only one thing, a children's astronomy textbook. Spine chart, page 77 bookmarked. What was on the page? He smiles. A picture of Orion, labeled, "The Hunter Never Sleeps." The assistant explains, they believe that phrase isn't metaphor. They believe Orion is an alert system, a guardian constellation. Watching, you take a step back, staring at the starfield. But that's just a myth. She grins. That's what makes it work. The monk holds up a data shard. There is one ship left unaccounted for. It was named the Telemachus, built to launch only when Orion's belt fell out of alignment. The librarian frowns, which, cosmologically speaking, shouldn't happen for at least another 50,000 years. Unless, the assistant adds, something pushed it. You stare again at Alnitak, the star that flickered. It pulses once more. The monk raises his arms. The hunter stirs. Another echo rattles through the bridge that it's not noise, that it's a ping, triangulated, buried in silence. Ancient, the librarian steps forward. We've had teams listening to the Orion coordinates for centuries. Always the same silence. Until 3 days ago. He taps a control pad on his wrist. From the speakers, a quiet click. Then another. Then, asterisk, a voice, crackled, glitching, undeniably human. Telemachus, reporting, return pattern, decoded. You stop breathing. The assistant whispers. It's active. A new projection appears, a flight path, from Mintaka to Earth, then Earth to somewhere far beyond. A red dwarf labeled Eidolon, 17. The monk bows. The legend was true. You shake your head. It's just a fluke. A recording. Or, the librarian says, a homing beacon, meant for those who still remember how to follow myths. You stare into the stars, and for the first time, you wonder, maybe the stars weren't named after stories. Maybe the stories named the stars. The corridor narrows. Not physically. You're pretty sure the dimensions stay the same, but it feels tighter, like the universe is leaning in, listening to your thoughts. The assistant walks a few steps ahead, more solemn now. The librarian doesn't speak at all. You pass through a set of curved archways, each marked with a different word: dust, will, ash. Again, a final gate opens into a chamber dimly lit by the glow of something massive and alive. You shield your eyes. At the center of the chamber floats a containment orb the size of a small moon. Inside churns the incandescent heart of a star, not a model, not a simulation. A real star, somehow compressed and stabilized, burning from within a shell of cold gravity and myth-reactive alloys. The air hums with its breath. Etched on the containment field is a name in a dozen scripts. Golem, say. Hello, the assistant murmurs. You're looking at humanity's final myth. You whisper, that's a golem? The golem. The librarian nods. Not made of clay this time. This one was forged from stellar crust, machine empathy, and a very specific type of sorrow. What's it protecting? He turns toward the star. A myth no one wanted to carry forward. The assistant steps beside him. Self-erasure. Humanity's final protocol. In case memory became a virus. In case myth became too heavy to hold. You take a step closer to the orb. The gravity thins around you. A warning, a hush. You can feel the presence inside. Resting, but aware. They built it to forget? You ask. To contain, she says. It holds every forbidden myth. Every story too dangerous, too corrosive, too tempting. The lies we believed so deeply. They bent the universe around them. This was our final firewall. You stare. Why lock it in a star? Because stars are what we trust, the librarian says. Even when they die, they do it beautifully. The chamber begins to react to your proximity. Holograms flare across the dome. Snippets of erased myths that a planet where belief could resurrect the dead. A weapon that rewrote cause and effect. A messiah who only existed because enough people needed him. Each of them flickers, then fades. All of these, the assistant says, were stories told one time too many. They became doctrine. Then doctrine became law. Then law became collapse. You whisper, so this is where we stored everything we were afraid might come true. She nods, and encoded a golem to protect it. A being designed not to awaken, but to stand watch. The librarian circles the chamber slowly. Every 1,000 cycles, someone tries to breach this vault, to awaken a forbidden tale, build a new religion from the ash of old fiction. They believe they can control it. You ask, do they ever succeed? The assistant lifts a hand. The containment orb flashes that a playback begins. Grainy footage from a ship's camera that a group of scavenger priests approaching the golem's shell. Chanting, begging, and then silence. Just absence. A whiteout, like memory was wiped from the feed. Itself, they're gone. You ask, they were unwritten. The librarian says, the word lands with a chill. You face the orb again. The swirling plasma inside pulses like a slow heartbeat. The golem itself is barely visible, a silhouette of limbs folded in prayer, encased in solar fire. Its eyes are closed. But you know, if you stepped too close, said the wrong name, asked the wrong question, it would open them. And then what? Some galactic historians argue, the assistant says softly, whether this was humanity's greatest error or its greatest kindness. To give the galaxy its myths, the librarian adds, but also protect it from the ones we never wanted to share. Your hand reaches out, instinctively, toward the field. The surface warms beneath your palm. No alarm sounds, but a word appears in the air before you. Do you still want to remember? You flinch. Was that? The assistant nods. It speaks only to humans, and only when asked nothing at all. You stare at the question. It doesn't fade. It waits. The librarian says, you don't have to answer. Most don't. But you do. Quietly. Almost too softly to count. I do. The field pulses gently, like an exhale that a memory not yours flashes across your vision. Earth long before its fall. A sunset at a launch station. A girl, young, pointing at the sky and whispering, I'll write my name into the stars so no one forgets. And then, stillness. The golem's eyes don't open. The myths stay sealed. But for one heartbeat, you feel something inside shift. Not aggression, not activation, recognition. And then it's gone. You step back. The question vanishes. The assistant watches you quietly. You passed. I didn't do anything. You remembered, she says. That was enough. The librarian joins her, folding his hands. Now we move on. There's one more story the galaxy keeps circling. What is it? He smiles gently. The one where the Earth leaves. You expected something dramatic. A final vault, maybe. A dark chamber pulsing with ominous light. But instead, the path opens into a garden, not a metaphorical one. An actual biosphere, lush, self-contained, orbiting a gentle red sun through layered simulation. Tall reeds sway under artificial wind. Vines hang from transparent domes that show constellations in wrong positions. Alien birds chirp in tritonal harmony. The assistant walks barefoot now, silent on soft moss. The librarian follows with hands behind his back, reverent. You whisper, this is peaceful, until you realize it's not growing. The assistant says, you look closer. The flowers bloom, but never wilt. Trees bend in a permanent lean, frozen in a wind that never changes. The garden is alive, but only just. Suspended. Preserved at the center, a massive object rests in the grass. Spherical. Metallic. Its hull is scarred and soot-stained, but unmistakably crafted that a planetary engine. It's a gravity mantle from Earth, the librarian says quietly. One of 5 used to steer the planet when it began to drift. You stare. Wait, are you saying? Yes, the assistant says. This is one of the last remnants of the wandering Earth. You sit, suddenly unsure if your legs can hold your weight. I thought that was just fiction. It was, she says. Until it wasn't. According to recovered records, some corrupted, others whispered across dying satellites. Earth didn't burn. It moved, not in desperation. In choice, when the sun dimmed prematurely, when the Earth's governments collapsed into squabbling entropy, a global coalition, brief, miraculous, and utterly impossible, formed around a single idea: take the planet. Leave the system. They built the engines, fired them, guided Earth away from its cradle. The galaxy lost track of her. For centuries, they searched. Some say they heard echoes of oceans. Others received snippets of lullabies and transmission fragments. But nothing concrete. Until this, the assistant kneels beside the great sphere and touches its hull. It thrums once, like it remembers gravity. This broke off during a course correction near a black hole, she says. The ship carrying it limped here. The crew, what remained, sealed their memories into soil and let the planet piece go. And now, you ask, it broadcasts one story. The librarian replies. He touches a control node hidden beneath the moss. A soft hum rises. A child's voice, distorted by time, begins to speak in perfect Terran English. Hello. If you're hearing this, you found us. We are the children of the Earth that walked away. We took our myths with us. We made them into wind. And now we carry them, wherever stars have room. Silence. Then another voice, older now, shakier. Please remember her. She's not lost, just tired. And still, wandering. You exhale slowly. Do they know where she is? The assistant shakes her head. She's beyond mapped space. No beacons. No return signals. Just this, a drift pattern etched into the hull. Like a star trail. You approach the engine. Its surface is warmed out. On one panel is a mural. Not carved, grown. Moss, lichen, and mineral staining have formed shapes too deliberate to be coincidence. A blue planet. Engines like mountain roots. Stars stretching endlessly. And a woman, tall, crowned in clouds. Her arms cradling a tiny fire. Below, a phrase in multiple scripts. Mother Earth. Now, forever, a story. The assistant says, there are people who believe the planet became sentient. That carrying our myths made it conscious. That's absurd. You whisper, but is it? You remember Babel. You remember the golem. You remember the cube whispering your name. Myth doesn't care if it makes sense to it, just cares if it's remembered. The librarian says, some believe that Earth's final myth wasn't about dying. It was about refusing to be buried. You sit in the grass and watch the projection of drifting stars above, and you wonder, where is she now? Does she sleep beneath silent ice? Is she orbiting a new sun? Has she found a species worth telling bedtime stories to? Or is she still moving, slow, defiant, proud, like a mother with nowhere to go, but refusing to stop? You ask, is anyone still looking for her? The assistant smiles gently. Always. You lean back, eyes fixed on the domed sky. Orion flickers again, distant and slightly wrong, and you imagine Earth, alone, impossible, mythic, still telling her stories to the stars. The air changes again, not the temperature, not the pressure, something deeper. As if the walls have relaxed. As if the station itself knows the end is near, and has let its metaphorical shoulders drop. You follow the assistant and the librarian into one final room. There are no doors here, no pressure seals, just open space, ringed by soft lights and hung with quiet recordings of human laughter, speech, song, some of it overlapping in ways that feel accidental, but also intimate. This is the archives. Heart, that it's not a library, that it's a mirror. You see your reflection across a dozen floating panes, each showing you, but from different points in your life. A child telling ghost stories. A teenager scribbling notes in a notebook labeled space. Ideas. An adult falling asleep beside an unfinished book. The assistant gestures to the center. A plinth rises. On it. A small cube, crystalline and inert. Touch it, she says. You hesitate, then lay your hand against it. The cube hums. And then the stories begin. Your stories, your childhood dreams, your forgotten tales, the bedtime myth. You invented for your little brother about a moon with a secret garden. It plays out in rich hologram, soft, stylized, dreamy. And the aliens? They watch, not skeptically, not academically, but with the reverence of monks receiving scripture. Every myth starts somewhere, the librarian says. Every great doctrine was once a whisper. Yours is now part of the doctrine. You pull your hand away. The cube glows now, faintly, permanently. Wait, you say? Is this it? Am I being archived? She nods. You mean I'm going to become one of those stories? Of course, she says gently. All myths begin with someone like you. Someone who wandered too far, asked the wrong question, stayed curious. You laugh. So I'm the next Jesus? Or Batman? She smiles. More like the next compass. You look around. Every part of this place, the halls, the myths, the symbols misread and lovingly rebuilt, has been pointing towards something. Not truth, not fact, meaning, and you, small, mortal, unspectacular, have accidentally walked yourself into the core of meaning-making. The librarian walks to a nearby terminal and inputs a single character. A blank page opens. You may write your own ending, he says. Or leave it blank. That's the part most beings don't understand. What? That silence is also sacred. You watch as new data begins to fold into the archive. Your face, your footsteps, your decisions, recorded not as biography, but mythos. And then, you see it, your name, added to the shelves of the great floating doctrine. Not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a possibility. The assistant whispers, thank you for remembering. That's all the galaxy ever needed. You smile. A little sad. A little proud. As you turn to leave, the librarian speaks one final time. By the way, we took the liberty of translating your myth into 36 languages. Someone on the outer spiral is already building a monument based on your moon garden story. You laugh. That was barely 3 paragraphs. And yet, he says, it's enough. You walk back down the long corridor, past the records, past the codes, past Fenrir, still sleeping. The lights dim gently, like a bedtime story drawing to its close. You feel it now, the quiet invitation humming in your bones. You came to see myths, but you leave as one. The stars outside the viewport fade into soft watercolor, like someone dipped a brush in silence and traced their way across the cosmos. The room dims. Not because anything has powered off, but because you have. Just a little. The edges of your thoughts slow. The orbit of your breath becomes predictable, easy, steady. Somewhere in a distant chamber, your name glows, carved into a place where stories rest until someone dares to tell them again. You are not a god, not a warrior, not a legend of conquest, but you were here, and that is, perhaps, what all myths need most of all, presence. Now the station spins on, quiet in its motion. The librarian tends to new echoes. The assistant walks barefoot beneath trees that never bloom. And the stories, your stories, settle into orbit, ready to be found again, centuries from now, when someone else wanders too far, asks the wrong question, and stays curious. So rest now. Traveler, that you've been many things tonight. A visitor, a witness, a myth, and somewhere, across the stars, another voice is beginning to dream your name into legend. Let it, and sleep well.